Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI. I'm Kevin Werbach, Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies from broadband to blockchain. Today, artificial intelligence promises to transform our world. But AI won't reach its potential without accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. One of the most important questions in AI accountability is how to go from principles to practice. My guest on this episode is Jean-Enno Charton, the Director of Digital Ethics and Bioethics at Merck KGAA of Darmstadt, Germany. The Merck Group, as it's also known, is today a separate legal entity from Merck & Company in the US and Canada, but it has over 60,000 employees and major operations in healthcare, life sciences, and electronics. It also has a very well-developed AI ethics program. In our conversation, Jean-Enno talks about the choices that Merck made in its responsible AI efforts and how his group was able to have impact within the organization. I hope you find his comments as instructive as I did. Jean-Enno, thank you so much for joining me on the Road to Accountable AI.
Thank you for having me.
So what is responsible AI or AI ethics? Pick the term that makes the most sense to you. What does that mean to you?
So AI ethics, or for us, it's also how we call it, digital ethics under data ethics, and AI ethics for me is the responsible handling of algorithms and AI. So how can we responsibly use and deploy this technology in the world so that key ethical principles are safeguarded, so that we create trust within our solutions. That may be trust from partners, trust from even our own employees, trust from customers, that we offer solutions that they trust us to buy solutions or work with us. That's the whole idea behind this. And to do this, actually, even besides regulation or in absence of regulation or develop regulation, we want to do the right thing. And how do we do this? By behaving ethically in our AI solutions. That's the not so short answer to responsible AI.
Before you had a digital ethics program, as I understand it, you had a bioethics advisory panel. How did that earlier work inform what you're doing on digital ethics and AI?
So within the company, the bioethics work started already in 2011, which is some time ago. And this arose from, let's say, bioethics challenges was us. We have a strong healthcare pillar. One of the pillars is healthcare. And it actually has quite some sort of like obviously clinical trial programs, but also our fertility research. One of the leaders in female fertility. Actually, this brought quite some questions around sort of like research on embryos, like stem cells with it. And how do we deal about this? And sort of at that point, 2011, there was quite a big debate around this. And so we decided to get external help in the sort of like the Merck Bioethics Advisory Panel, it was then called. And they really helped us to come up with principles and structures and how to address ethical questions. And then when 5 years ago, we first ventured really into digital health with the collaboration that we have with Palantir called Syntropy, we really looked into sort of like, okay, how do we do this ethically? Because as I mentioned, the trust element is really critical for us. And then we looked at sort of like, okay, what have we learned from the bioethics? How do we operationalize it? How we put this forward? And that's sort of like how we borrowed from the bioethical principles and frameworks and everything that we had done, and also these advisory panel work into digital ethics and then also AI ethics. And that's something that I guess why pharmaceutical companies have a little bit of a head start here, because we have been dealing with these ethical questions all along, and we are a highly regulated sector at the same way. So we're not the first time we encounter this. So we can borrow some ideas we've had before, other than maybe, let's say, big tech, who have not been in this situation before, that there's like also like a very critical public having a look at you. So like how do you behave doing this rightly, and really being careful that you do the right thing in your innovations. Also because you're under a very strong public eye.
What's different about AI ethics from bioethics? Why not take the existing advisory board that you had and just extend it into this area?
Yeah, so that's, we realized we needed very specific expertise. Actually, we went with our first digital ethics questions to this existing advisory panel and said, okay, can you advise us how to do this? And they said, yes, we can give you a few hints, but this is out of our realm. This is not something we can help you with. You can give you some basic principles, but first of all, you actually, for yourself, you need to set yourself, let's say, ethical standards or ethical principles that then you can derive your tools from, because we always come from the bio and medical side, and we have no experience at all in the digital sphere. I mean, we have some that have sort of like big data, medical big data experience, but the skill set is very different. And that's also why our digital ethics advisory panel is, other than the bioethics one, is consisted also out of industry experts. So they're all external, but they're, let's say, a mixture of academic and industry experts, while the bioethics purely academic, because there's hardly enough, let's say, academic insight right now into all the AI and the innovation is happening within the companies. So it's very difficult to get the right expertise there. So we read more on this, and then yes, I said that also, for example, our legal experts, they really come now from the FDA, regulatory, medical devices, AI side to really help us with this. And also the factor of fairness became much more important in this regard. So we have an anthropologist actually from Johns Hopkins, Khadija Ferryman, joining, because he has a special eye on, neglected populations and sort of like, how do we really take care that there's not a bias in our systems, and how can we take care that these people are rightfully addressed also. So that's sort of some of the points. And then also the principles are not the same. I mean, they're similar, but then there's different emphasis. And also one thing is that bioethicists are not so keen on going to principle frameworks and these kind of this, and the digital ethicists are much more open to this, because they see at a large scale, how can we do this? Because within bioethics, it's usually a few larger topics that we discuss. And within digital ethics, it's a huge amount of topics that we go into on a regular basis. I mean, we have more than 1,000 analytics use cases, for example, in one unit alone. And how can we screen this at a high throughput? And this will not work without assessments and frameworks and these likes, and will not just be a one-on-one discussion with an ethicist. But I will go into this in more detail probably later on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really interesting. How do you find people who have the right kind of expertise? It probably was easier when you were doing it, getting started a few years ago, than now, where every company now feels like they need to bring in people that have AI ethics expertise. But
Yeah.
How do you find people that have the right expertise, but also are a good enough fit for your organization?
Yeah, so I mean, sort of like we had started a little bit because we went through obviously our existing panel where we have, okay, do you know somebody and something is happening? But then 5 years ago, this was a little bit more exotic. Nowadays, it's also more difficult because everybody is all of a sudden an AI ethics expert. So it's really difficult to find this. So when we try to go through this, despite going through our let's say our esteemed experts that we already have, we go through our business that often has already the context to sort of like the right people in our digital unit, EMV Digital, that is located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There's really they have really good context already, let's say, to the academic sphere due to this innovation part. And so we got somebody along as John Lamka, who works for Mayo Clinic, but was like a CIO in Harvard for many years, to give us insights. And then from there, we went bit by bit forward looking. Also, what kind of expertise do we need? So we scanned a little bit the academic sphere, looking into, okay, what kind of academics do we need? Is there already something? And what kind of expertise do they have? Have they published in this field? This is obviously very important that we go by publications and see, okay, the speakers, what's the background? And then usually we invite them for a few test sessions and see, does that work for panel meetings? And through them, we then get exposed to other experts again, also to more industry experts. So it's a bit grown exercise. I think we started with 3 experts and then one changed, then we were at 2. And then by now, I think we're 7 experts. And what's important to see that we also have a linker between these 2 panels. So there's one bioethicist, Jeremy Sugarman. He's also from Johns Hopkins. He's a bioethics professor. He has done some work for the Obama administration. So he's very well renowned in the US. And he's, let's say, a generalist in bioethics. And he's also sitting on the digital ethics panel. So there's a link between them, and they can also learn from each other, also share best practices.
You talked about the distinction between bioethics and digital ethics, although as you mentioned, there are some connections. Is AI ethics just a subset of digital ethics?
Yes, for us, it's a subset of digital ethics. When we started to develop, let's say, ways to ethically handle data, because our first business ideas, this started with, as mentioned, syntropy. This was about health data and sharing health data, and how can we analyze data in larger data banks. And we decided, okay, we need something for ethically handling of data. this was 2018, then AI ethics had popped up, but it was not really present. And we said from the beginning, okay, we want to do something that encompasses AI ethics and data ethics at the same time, because for AI, you will always need good sets of data, and since data need to handle the data in the right way for all the training, especially now for generative AI. And so we decided to do this under the term digital ethics as once. Many might just be also responsible AI is maybe for some the more, especially in the IT field, the more understandable term for them. But for us, this is sort of like digital ethics encompasses this all, so that we really also make sure for data. This is something as a German company, a German headquartered company. This is also something where there's a high, at least within the country, there's a high view on how do we handle data, or within the EU in general, the GDPR, you have heard about this probably. So that's why also we said, okay, we also need a strong footprint on data ethics. And so we encompass this as two together.
Other than the heightened sensitivity and the regulation, as you mentioned, what's different about thinking through these issues in a healthcare and life sciences company?
I mean, obviously we are in a heavily regulated environment already, which makes it more difficult a little bit to operate. And then it's also the most sensitive area you can imagine. So the trust element is even more critical for us than for other providers, I'd say. I mean, maybe goes similarly for banks, and the sensitivity or insurers. But then health is usually the most personal information people have. And we see this even in the US, that there's a higher, let's say, alertness towards health data than maybe other data being used. And so this was really for us the strong push. Okay, we need to get this forward. And also we're discussing with other companies in the health field. And actually the most reach out from other companies I get is from actually in the healthcare field, because they see they have to be extra alert and extra early prepared for this, because this is something that might help them otherwise in the long run. And also if you look at the UAI Act, applications within healthcare will most likely get in the high-risk group and always will need more detailed analysis and oversight.
Cutting the other way, though, even within your corporate group, there are many different businesses, different units, different products, a range of different kinds of issues. So how can you, as a large company, you develop one set of guidelines or one process around digital ethics that spans all of them?
And so, I mean, I lead a small team of experts. I mean, we report directly to the board of directors, and we have, we're sort of like owning the topic over all our businesses. So the healthcare, the life science, and our electronics business, and also our, what we call the enabling functions. So all our, let's say, finance and HR for everything. So, and we actually take care of questions for all of them. But we have one code of digital ethics for the company that defines our principles. And it's not do's and don'ts, it's specifically principles. A set of in total 20 grouped under 5 major principles. And from these, we can develop guidelines and do's and don'ts for certain applications, certain areas, certain fields. So that was very important for us that we do something for the entire group. But then obviously these sectors have very different needs. I mean, for our life science sector, for example, for the analytics unit, I already mentioned it before. We have one what's called the Analytics Center of Excellence. We have a platform here on Foundry. It's a technology platform. And here people can develop analytics use cases from ideation to proof of value to industrialization. And they, for example, asked us, can you quickly build us a filter so we can identify those cases that have ethical challenges? And within life science, which is sort of like our business that sells let's say, any kind of lab materials, but also tools like genome editing tools or mRNAs and lipids. So also offer services. Their data may not be as sensitive as the healthcare data. So we don't think that there's so many use cases that are critical. So we just wanted to build a filter to find out the few that are critical. And so we, based on our digital ethics, we develop ethical markers that we then put into questions that the use case owners can actually have to answer as part of the process in their different stages. And we can see, okay, is there an ethical risk? Yes or no. And then we can, if there's an ethical risk or the score is high, then we go and analyze it. So this is, for example, one way. But then, for example, in HR, which is right now one of my closest customers, I'd say, with all the Gen AI solutions that come along, or AI solutions in general, whether we insource them or if we develop them ourselves. these are not so many, but then they all have very individual needs. So we're currently developing a different framework, a little bit based on what we've done before, but much more concrete for HR, which comes with certain questions. And then we also developed something similar again for healthcare, really tailored to them. So that's really the code is applicable for all, but then it's like, how do we market our different customers? So I'm really running a small consultancy here, rather than doing a one size fits all solution, or doing a do and don't for everything in one document.
How did you decide what principles to put into that code of digital ethics?
So for those who are really keen on this, they can read about this. There's actually publication in AI Society about this, how we put this. I have published this with a partner from the University of Wittenherdecke in Germany, Sarah Becker. She has been on our advisory panel also before as one of the leading experts. And we really went and looked into, being a European company, we looked into, okay, what kind of principles and frameworks have been published in the EU in the last 5 years back then. So this was between 2015 and 2020 when we started this. And what has been published towards data ethics and AI ethics. I think we had and may they be from governments, may they be from corporations, may they be from NGOs or think tanks, and we found a total of 62 frameworks. And this was back then, I guess now it's several hundred. And we tried to identify principles in all of them to have a most holistic view. And often they were called differently, but we really tried to look into all details and to see, okay, is there sort of like a one word behind this where we can find it also? Because some of them are really marketing speech or semantic differences, but we really could narrow them down to the different details. Then after that, we actually grouped them into the 5 major principles that you see now when you access the code on our homepage. You can see 5 different principles, and actually 4 of them are identical with the bioethical overall principles that exist. And one of them actually is new, is transparency, which is because this is actually more or less the key principles when we go to digital ethics. This was a larger endeavor that took us more over a year. What we also did after is actually we checked whether, okay, how does this work within the US? Principles that have been formulated there, or also within Asia and China, for example, especially. And we see that it actually matches pretty well, because it really just defines ethical principles in a philosophical manner. So it's really, if you would read this as normal employee, it's rather complex, and we have to easen it down for people to explain, but it really helps us to identify challenges. And we saw that, for example, it works well in the US, but also in China. And maybe if we look in the Asian geographies, it might more be that the traditional principle of harmony coming along, that the autonomy is not as important, and there's harmony coming up a little bit more. Societal harmony is a higher value, but beyond that, we have something that is actually quite checked globally also.
Why is transparency so distinctively important for digital ethics?
So we think about this. For us, the key element, or why we do this, is really to create trust in our solutions, that we offer trustful solutions. And I think with this high opacity that AI has, or the whole big data topic has behind it, it's really extremely difficult to grasp what is happening. And everybody knows they're putting the data somewhere on the net and something's happening with it, but nobody knows what's really happening. And you always imagine these kind of things that are happening with your data, or they might be used in a certain way. And so this is for us that we say, okay, we want to be transparent. We really want to share sort of like what we do and how we do it, and be as open as possible about our sort of like maybe AI solutions, and what's happening within them, so the people can actually trust in these solutions and lose the fear and skepticism of these solutions. I mean, and this goes not only externally, but also internally with our employees here at Merck KGAA, Darmstadt, Germany, because this is really something that, I mean, obviously we have the whole variety of society working for us. And also here, there's quite a level of mistrust, especially we look at blue collar workers and sort of like, okay, this AI may cause my job, but also our white collar workers are threatened by ChatGPT and think, okay, what does that mean? And what kind of solutions are we using? And so this is something where we think, okay, we really want to educate here. This is really where this transparency even plays a very important role in-house. So we really educate and be transparent with our own employees so that they understand this.
One of the reasons that I was interested in speaking with you is that you have published a couple of these papers, which we'll put in the show notes, talking about your approach. And I was particularly interested in one that talked about what you call principal at risk analysis for operationalizing AI ethics. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so this comes a little bit. So why did we actually put this code to digital ethics? I mean, why do we need this? Couldn't we just do with the bioethicists that advised us? Because we do not have like a code of bioethics for the company. And this comes to the fact that there is not yet a fixed sort of like set of principles for digital ethics out there. And bioethics are very well established since 30 years or so. But for us, it's not the case. And so we realized, okay, we cannot just simply form the digital ethics panel, but they need something to orient themselves on. And sort of like, and these principles that we formulated in the code, they're sort of like as guidance for the experts to take decisions, but also obviously as an overall guidance for the company. But also, and this is why it's really designed in this way, that we can build analytical tools from it. And this is sort of like the para, as we call it. This tool actually we developed directly from the code, which is sort of like a way to analyze a certain questions and see whether in a certain business model things are at risk or principle is at risk. And with this outcome of this analysis, we could say, okay, if we have a certain question, for example, are we responsible how things are done in a certain way and a certain technology? And then we can, an expert, not everybody in the company, but our expert in my team can do this analysis. And then we find out, okay, 5 principles of our total 20 are at risk. And then this for us is the discussion basis then with the panel. I mean, that might not be a complete identification of all ethical risks, but it's really a good head start, because often at the beginning of a discussion around an ethical certain technology or ethical challenges, it's all over the place and you need to structure it well. And so this really helps us to go sort of like in the risks on certain principles and how can we address them bit by bit. And so this type of like also like a bit of a loop. So a question comes to us from the business. We sort of, if it's a complex question, we run this through this analysis. The report then goes to the panel, and then they can prepare themselves. And then we sit down with the panel and discuss all of these risks and how can we mitigate these risks, what has to be put in place. And then sort of like this goes back to the business as a recommendation. And then we see it of like a loop of reporting several times to see, okay, is it actually a solution that's working? This is sort of like how can we actually operationalize this? And this is, let's say, for larger complex questions, how can we do this in a better way? I mean, if we would run the power on any kind of most questions, then I would need like 20 people in my office.
But for those complex questions, it's a focusing mechanism, it sounds like, for the discussion that's an input to the advisory board.
And also really shows you the risk that might arise and something that you might just not have on your radar that might happen.
And then the output, as I understand it, of the advisory board, as you said, is a recommendation. What happens if the business says, we don't agree, or the business benefit of this is too great, we're going forward anyway?
So this is always the problem. I mean, so there's 2 different approaches to how do you digital ethics. I mean, there's the way of ethics-based auditing, which is more through compliance. So there has been a paper from Jacob Mukanda on this with AstraZeneca. I think this has been done. They showed like this value of sort of you audit every project. And sort of like in our company, we run it a bit different. This is also experience with bioethics. We are sort of awareness-based. So we do trainings and people know that they exist, that we exist, that they can address us. And so we are sort of like, people are not forced to ask us, but sort of like they come to us for questions. And throughout the years or through bioethics, we have built up a very good reputation. So people come to us because they need the help and they see this is actually helpful for their business. They could ignore us and they could also ignore the advice, but it's well documented within the company. And sort of if you ignore the advice and later on then run into problems, then this actually, I mean, obviously hurt very much the decision takers, let's say, reputation with the company. So it's sort of like a little bit of pressure. And it also goes to the way that we say, okay, for us, we're a family-owned business, or let's say we're on the stock market, but 70% is off stock market in family hands. There's a higher sense of, let's say, generational thinking. So we want to have a sustainable business in 50 and 30 years for the next generation of the family. And so this whole of responsible business, it has been a longer thing. And it has also been, it's on the responsibility is on everybody's hands. So it's not just with the data scientist or AI scientist, AI developer that's on the all end, but it's also with the middle manager, the high manager, and the board of directors. So it's really the entire chain. And this is sort of like a certain culture we have established with the company And this helps that actually people come to us and they take these recommendations seriously. I mean, they ask us for certain questions. And I must also say some recommendations obviously we are not able to implement because just they're maybe not realistic. But so we come back and we ask, okay, can we have a more pragmatic solution? What do you think about this? We approach it in a certain way, but sort of like how you think it's not working because probably they do not have enough insights in our processes and business. And then we really go an iterative way to find a solution that's best fitting. And I also have to say that our advisors are rather pragmatic. I mean, we're not going to, we don't have ivory tower fundamentalists that come with a certain way, but it's really, okay, this is a pragmatic solution. And obviously we cannot aim for total perfection, but it's of, let's say, risk mitigation on a larger level. We do, go a pragmatic way.
What has changed over the time that you've been doing this digital ethics and AI ethics work? Obviously, there's now a lot more adoption of AI. There's generative AI. How has that influenced the nature of the work you do or things that you've learned?
Yes, actually, so 5 years ago, I took over the team of digital ethics or bioethics. Actually, I built this up before. This was the side job of the chief medical officer, and I said, okay, we need somebody skilled for this. And I saw this sort of like coming up. I was just me as a lone player back then, and so pushed this a little bit forward the company, but it was seen as a rather, let's say, esoteric topic or something like data governance or data ontology that nobody wants to do. It's something of a side business. And I've really seen let's say, in the last year, I mean, the people that come to me and ask me questions has been risen exponentially within the company. I mean, this is ChatGPT finally showed people things are happening and actually I need to address these things and I want to have certain solutions and how can I have them? How can I have them responsibly? This obviously has also been sort of like under the attention of the board. And we now have since a few years also a chief data and AI officer who's really taking care of this. And he's actually the chair of the panel. So he's a very close partner in crime with me. He's really pushing this forward. And we see a big momentum. We have a big data culture team within the company now that's really pushing this forward. We do a lot of awareness. And I mean, I can see that there's not only me pushing and standing in the corner, but there's also a big pull effect from different businesses. So I don't need to stand on everybody's door anymore and say, okay, I'm very sure you have some questions for me, but people are running to me and ask questions. So there's, and it's also externally. I was just yesterday sitting on a panel also with somebody from Google Cloud Services actually, and from Munich. And she was also saying that all of a sudden since a year, this whole data governance, data ethics thing has moved out of the shadow. And she always says people, this is unsexy in the beginning and people need to get their basics right. And it's sort of like eating your veggies every day. But this is something you have to do in order to be able to innovate fast. And this is also what our chief data AI officer who worked with automotive sector before always says. I mean, he always comes to me and saying, so why do we have brakes in the car? So the brakes we have so we can go safe, but fast. So it's like, okay, this what we have enables us to innovate really rapidly, but sort of like in a safe manner. So we actually can hit the brake if needed.
One of the issues with generative AI is these foundation models, which get developed by big tech companies, OpenAI, Google, and so forth. And then an organization like yours might be using that model and bringing in some of your own data and building queries and specialized applications, but you're not the ones who are controlling the original training of the model. Have you had to confront that issue, or how would you think about that in terms of your ethics work?
So for example, so we actually use an insourced model within the company that we have our own, we have our own GPT, my GPT that we have in the progression where we can actually, let's say, it's cut off so we can put in our own data or let's say confidential data from the company. And, but obviously there are questions around, okay, how do we do this? And obviously the IP questions in the larger frame, sort of like how it has been trained, it's becoming much more prominent now. So how do we deal with this? But one question, for example, that also came up in this whole thing that in our speak up line, actually somebody asked us, so you see our compliance speak up line, we got the questions that, okay, there were those reports that the OpenAI had workers in Kenya actually were exposed to violent materials or pornography materials and didn't get the right counseling. And so they did this for like $60 a day and they were really suffering a lot. And how can we, what kind of thing is this? And so we really looked into, okay, is this a technology we can use? Has it been has this been developed under human rights violations? And obviously we did like a survey, we see it's not the case. And also these kind of programs have been halted. And so OpenAI is no longer pursuing this. So that's why we can use technology. But so this is some of the things that are on our radar. And I think, you can read up on this. There was a Time article, I think, some time ago on this. And it's something that we take seriously and survey, but obviously then we try to also, when we in-source solutions, especially now when HR is a big topic right now, and we actually have developed also ways to assess the vendor of a product. So in the final sort of like when we have like 2 or 3 finalists in our vendor selection processes, actually we come now for AI solutions with a certain kind of questions that really check also not only sort of like how does the company behave, what kind of principles do they have, but also how they address issues, how do they have like bodies, then digital ethics, or have they have sort of like a crisis mode for this, or certain things, just do they take this topic as seriously as we do? So that's also a big thing, because most AI solutions, I believe, we will insource. I mean, we will use the few skilled people on this behalf, maybe like 200 or so, to develop solutions for research, clinical research, prediction tools, and these kind of things. We're not going to use our in-house experts to develop HR tools. Obviously, these will mostly insource and maybe adapt. And here we really need to find a good way of sort of like, okay, how can we ensure that this aligns with our principles and general vision for AI?
You mentioned earlier on the European AI Act, European Union AI Act. As a company that was doing this digital and AI ethics work for a long time before that regulation was adopted, how do you anticipate that influencing and impacting your work?
So this was also a case where our work was suddenly highlighted and was seen as very valuable. A few weeks ago, a consultancy highlighted sort of like the sort of did a survey of sort of like EU AI Act readiness within the company, and we saw that we have a very strong foundation thanks to all the work that my team has been doing in the last 5 years. So that's a good head start. I mean, it's also good for us to see, okay, we're doing something this, because the whole thing here was, as I said, how do we behave rightly in the absence of regulation? So we had this sort of like future regulation probably upcoming already a little bit in mind when we design certain things. The influence on us is not going to be that strong. I think it's a little bit more about building sort of like one of the things that we need for now is to identify high risk cases and really document them in the right database and sort of look at this. So this is going to be a little bit of more building a broader AI governance that we do not have in that strict way right away, because right now it's more decentralized. So to really enable innovation. So we will move to a little bit more centralized AI governance that also gives like a consolidated mandatory review, I guess, for high risk cases. So it's no longer voluntary, as in my case, but then there will probably like a legal ethics and whatever other body review of certain projects and areas that we identify really in response to this regulation. So it may slow down a bit in things, and let's say it's not a perfect regulation, but I mean, I have 2 hearts. One over in the company, I want to be a little more free, but I'm also a citizen. And sort of like as a citizen, I really much appreciate that the European Union is moving forward with this. It's not an ideal framework, but I think it's still better than having no framework at all. And you would see how this plays out, but I think it's also going to be a little bit of a role similar to the GDPR, which we have pushed forward, which is lived very differently in different European countries. So in Estonia, it's lived very differently and much more openly than in Germany. So I assume it's similar going to be with the AI. But I think it's a good thing moving forward with this. And I think also other world regions will look at us pushing this forward, and how have we done this, and what are sort of the key elements. And obviously everybody wants access to this market. So let's see how this plays out. But and also how the documentation requirements in the end really are. For us as a larger company, obviously it's easier than maybe for like a 100 people player.
Jean-Enno, thank you for a really enlightening and instructive conversation.
Thank you. I mean, for all those who should see this, I mean, don't hesitate to reach out to me through LinkedIn, learn more about how our company is doing this. And yeah, we're willing to share. We actually do a lot of cross-company initiatives also to share best practices, pushing things forward, educating, really policymakers, or also exchanging with academics that do case studies on us. So feel free to reach out to me or my team members and discuss.
Wonderful. This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening.